U.S. intelligence officials accused China and Russia of interfering in the upcoming 2020 U.S. elections, claiming that China would favor Trump losing while Russia is undercutting Biden. China's foreign ministry responded saying that China has never interfered in the U.S. elections and has no interest in doing that in the future. What is the basis of the U.S. accusation? And meanwhile, latest polls show that Biden leads in Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, swing states that Trump won in 2016. So what are Trump's re-election prospects? Joining us from Moscow on the line is Sergey Sanakoev, President and CEO of the Russian-Chinese Analytical Center. From Washington, D.C., Rick Dunham, co-director of the Global Business Journalism Program at Tsinghua University, and from Shanghai, still Professor Chen, Executive Director at the Asia-Pacific Studies Center at East China Normal University. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. So let's take a look at the statement of the Director of the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center, saying in this statement, which was released on August the 7th, that Russia, China and Iran are trying to interfere in the 2020 U.S. election. It says, we assess that China prefers that President Trump, whom Beijing sees as unpredictable, does not win re-election. China has been expanding its influence efforts ahead of November 2020 to shape the policy environment in the United States, pressure political figures it views as opposed to China's interests, and deflect and counter criticism of China. So I want to go to Rick here. Why do you think the U.S. is so really obsessed with these external factors, which are very tenuous, and there are not too many evidence that have been found here, technical evidence or traces of China's influencing or interference in the U.S. elections. Meanwhile, domestically, things in the United States really are not looking so good.
Well, let's look at it on two levels. One is the charges by the Trump administration. And in this case, there was no evidence presented, so it's a question of trusting them. About China, about Iran, about Russia. There is no evidence that they have presented. That doesn't mean that there is no evidence, but we don't know it. But in terms of the other level of social media, there is substantial evidence of Russian involvement through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Hundreds of accounts have been taken down. Thousands of posts have been flagged, and there are trends there of the Russian intelligence trying to re-elect Donald Trump, from white supremacist posts to anti-Biden posts to left-wing posts criticizing Biden and the Democratic National Committee. That doesn't come from the U.S. government. That comes from the companies who have found it. But the questions of China, I think, on the other level, have to do with politics. And does the Chinese government prefer not having Trump? Well, probably, but that's a long way from saying the Chinese government is trying to elect Biden or trying to defeat Trump.
Well, the director of that particular agency talked about increasingly critical public rhetoric from Beijing over the past few months of Trump administration's COVID-19 response, of the closure of the Houston consulate of China, and actions on other issues. For instance, he talked about China harshly criticizing the administration's statements and actions on Hong Kong, on TikTok, the legal status of the South China Sea, and China's efforts to dominate the 5G market. So it says that Beijing recognizes that all of these efforts might affect the presidential race. So, Professor Chen, does that mean that, the conclusion that China prefers President Trump loses, thus China is trying to influence the U.S. presidential election, is based on these, harsh rhetoric that Beijing has sent out in response, actually, to U.S. rhetoric or U.S. actions?
Well, the U.S. presidential election is a very complicated political scenario. It is not some kind of a very simple, childish play. So, in other words, it is very, comprehensive issue. So, in other words, it is not expected that actually China would be choosing, preferring one over the other, in expectation of this kind of international politics or, world politics. In other words, let's see that actually whoever sits in the Oval Office next year in January, China will have to deal with that person. So in other words, I don't think actually China would be deliberately trying to prefer to wishfully thinking that actually someone would be, in that office. And also, there's a lot of unpredictability in the candidates, both Trump and also Biden, there's definitely a kind of like convergence or bipartisanship in the two parties. So you can't expect actually the preferential, choice of one person will definitely lead to a favorable policy, a China policy in the United States. So
and I don't think China is so powerful, China is so savvy that we're able to do that, even if we want to. However, as Rick just mentioned, the accusation against Russia seems to have much more support among many people. So let me bring in my guest, Sanakoev. Mr. Sanakoev, how do you look at the opinion? Okay. The obsession, I would say, with the accusation of Russia and China, and this time bringing China in the same rank as Russia, Mr. Sanakoev.
In my opinion, the American rhetoric about our country's interference in the U.S. election process goes beyond the bounds of normality. I'm not even talking about the obvious double standards, how the Americans interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. Let's remind Hong Kong or Xinjiang Uyghur region, etc. And what they have arranged a tantrum about far-fetched cyber attacks. Following their logic, it turns out that Russia and China are promoting different candidates for the U.S. presidency. Can we also have a fight about this? Maybe they think like this. This is complete nonsense. We never cooperate with our partners against any other third country. Yes, certainly we, Russia, Iran, China, do not like the U.S. policy of domination, the modern world. Their actions as a self-proclaimed hegemon are already being everyone in the world. But this does not mean that we are intent to interfere in the internal affairs. We will develop our cooperation. We will conduct our integration process. We are building a multipolar world. We remain open to any country, including the United States, in all this. And the methods used by individual politicians in the United States, it's time to throw away history.
It's actually quite interesting, right? Because there is this, blame China, and then now there is this blame Russia. I want to ask Rick, what do you think is the difference between these two games, and is there a difference? And also, if China is supporting Biden and Russia is supporting Trump, is election becoming a new battleground for Russia and China to see who has bigger influence?
Yeah, I think that there is not really an equivalence between some people in China preferring that Trump would not be president because of his unpredictability and his rhetoric, and Russia's military intelligence active interference in the election. And the fact that U.S. has interfered in other countries' affairs has no relevance to this, and there's no defense for that. But I think really that right now some of the Trump administration wants a moral equivalence, saying everyone's interfering, so what Russia is doing is not important. And so I think it's really important that we try to seek evidence, if there is any, of Chinese government involvement. I think right now all we've seen is the foreign ministry making statements critical of the Trump administration, largely in reaction to what the Trump administration has been doing. And so I think many people on Capitol Hill have asked the Trump administration, where's the beef? Where's the evidence of interference by Iran, of interference by China, beyond TikTok, beyond WeChat, beyond Twitter posts being critical of the Trump administration.
Mr. Sanakoev, you want to react to what Rick just said?
Certainly, I think it's we don't care who will be the winner in U.S. It's really we have no illusions. Whoever wins in the United States, the confrontation of systems, the current model of the Pax Americana world order, and the multipolar system from another hand will continue until the United States give up its imperialist ambitions. This is the most important for us.
Okay.
And that's why we are together with Russia and China.
Let's take a look just of the kind of background that we're talking about, the dwindling public support that President Trump is faced with. For instance, the latest polls show that Biden leading in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Experts says the national political landscape has clearly and significantly shifted in Joe Biden's favor. So, Professor Chen, if President Trump really wants to secure his re-election, what should he be doing now? And is there any hope left at all that he could still win his re-election?
Well, I think actually the biggest problem for Trump and also his team is actually the disastrous mishandling of the pandemic in his own country, and also, of course, the widespread nationwide rioting that is actually, happening, rampaging in different cities and states in the United States. I think actually this kind of mishandling of the scenario indicates actually a lack of competence in the part of his administrative skills, and that actually plays a very negative, part or role in his leverage of the campaign. I think actually this is definitely, making him actually at a very, weak point at this.
Finally, Rick, how much is the blaming related to his trailing polls numbers?
Oh, I think right now we're at a point where Donald Trump cannot win the election, but he can become president. He can win re-election by destroying Biden. And I think right now he's looking for enemies. He's not going to convince the American people that he is a strong leader, that he has done well in coronavirus or handling the economy. But he can talk about outside enemies, inside enemies like the news media, and the threat of Joe Biden. So I think that's what we're going to see, a very negative 3 months where Donald Trump is going to go after perceived enemies to try to shift attention from his own record.
What's this blaming China and Russia going to do to the potential results? Is this a convenient excuse? Let's say if he loses, is there any consideration in that front? Rick, briefly, please.
Well, I think that anything is possible. I mean, Donald Trump is already saying that other countries can print up ballots that will be mailed in. I think it's fantasy, but I think that, yes, it's possible it would happen.
All right. Professor Chen, you looking at the kind of accusation about China interfering or Russia interfering against the health of the U.S. electoral system.
Yes, I think actually that only plays negative on Trump's part, because actually playing up the China threat theory definitely will only stoke up a kind of like a weaklings image. In other words, like Rick said, actually he's only blaming others instead of actually making himself stronger. How can that kind of person be a strong leader in this kind of a crisis, this time of crisis? I think actually that will pose a very acute question for all the Americans.
All right. We're going to leave it there. Many thanks to our guests from Russia, Sergey Sanakoev, President and CEO of the Russian-Chinese Analytical Center, Rick Dunham from Tsinghua University, and Professor Chen from East China Normal University. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. You can follow me on Twitter with Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point. I'm going on holiday for a few days, so see you when I come back.